Hey everyone, you're listening to the Lead Stories podcast, where we believe that everyone has influence.
Is this working?
I don't know, but that sounded weird.
Oh, it's working. It's just very small.
Okay. Oh, it was working the whole time. Hey everyone, you're listening to the... Well, not my favourite.
Okay.
Okay, you've got... From a minute, you can eradicate the first minute.
Okay.
Hey everyone, you're listening to the Lead Stories podcast, where we believe that everyone has influence.
And when you're intentional with your influence, then you are a leader. I'm Pastor Seth.
And I'm Joe Saxton. Hey everyone.
Hey. So we launched this year's Hello Goodbye
Hello. Goodbye.
last week.
Woohoo.
And now we're going to go in the order that we probably should have named it, but it doesn't sound as good, which is Goodbye Hello.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about how to say goodbye today.
It's important. Here's the weird thing.
Yeah.
I so love doing this process that in my mind, all I can hear is, it's the most wonderful time of the year.
Even when you're saying goodbye
Yeah,
to painful things.
Exactly, which is being discordant. So I'm now going to have to refocus as we learn how to say goodbye.
Yeah, so if you are just like, what are we talking about, please listen to the last episode.
Yeah, it's a shorter one, friends.
This is actually how we started the podcast in the first place, was a hello goodbye process.
It really was, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's about saying goodbye to the year that's just happened, 2019, and saying hello to the new year, 2020, which is why it should be goodbye hello, but it doesn't matter. So today we're talking about goodbye and how to say goodbye, because I do think it's important, like you said, and there are some parts of it that feel hard and it's easy to get stuck, and there's a lot of things around it that I think if we can address those a little bit today, that could be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's just very tempting to keep adding to our lives and not acknowledge the imprint that circumstances, relationships, jobs, decisions, habits, vices have left.
Yeah.
It'd be wonderful, wouldn't it, if we could just be like, and I'm done. And there are areas in our life where we walk away and we walk. But sometimes saying goodbye is like the bad breakup.
It is, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You say goodbye, you say it's over, and then you crawl all the way back in, and you're kind of hanging out, and before you know it, you're back where you started.
Right.
And that's one thing when it's a relationship that's not ideal, and that can be really pervasive in our lives, but it's also not helpful. Let's say you need to learn how to say the word no. And just accept no as the complete sentence that it is.
No,
Do you know what I mean? And then it's like, oh, but that person asked me so nicely, and before you know it, you're back into the habit.
They use emojis in their email.
And they're so sweet, and it's only going to take a minute. And when we say a minute, we mean 3 days. And before we know it, we're back into the old habit. So we've got to learn how to say goodbye if we're going to say hello to the new that a new year has to offer us. We have to know how to be sure how to protect our hello by really going after our goodbye.
Yeah, it can be uncomfortable to do it. There's lots of reasons why we don't want to, but any healthy organism excretes.
Yes.
Any healthy, there are
Poops.
things that have to
Basically, she's saying it poops.
It poops. Things need to be let go.
Released.
And released. I think of the story.
Expelled. Sorry.
I think of
Okay.
I think of the story of the Israelites, the people of God, being led into the wilderness out of Egypt. And I feel as though we could look at that story and say they left Egypt pretty quickly, pretty abruptly, having not thought that was going to happen. I'm not sure they really said goodbye to said location.
Oh gosh, no.
And so then they end up in a space where they're wanting to go back to something that that is absolutely not going to be better for them, but they didn't really say goodbye to it.
That's a fascinating way as well, because that whole wilderness experience, and for those of us unfamiliar with the story, the people of God wander for 40 years, an entire generation, something that did not need to take that long, physically didn't need to take that long, because they were still holding on to the past.
Exactly. You could say that
they romanticized it.
Yes, the reason that it had to be a journey that could have been, I guess I don't know the exact...
I think a month or two.
Month, yeah. A journey that could have been 40 days turned into 40 years because they couldn't release something. And I'm not even necessarily ragging on these guys, because when you've been in captivity, I get it. I get it.
And also because we do this all the time.
Right.
How many of us are, I'm never going to trust somebody again because we've not fully dealt with how we were wounded in a past relationship.
And then you actually end up in a similar relationship because you didn't actually process it.
And you perpetuate the same problems.
Yeah.
How many of us have gone back to the same sorts of things?
Yeah. And it's real, so I guess what we're trying to say is, No shame, that happens.
No.
But let's try to be as intentional as possible to let those things go, because like you've said before, it took 40 years to get Egypt out of them.
Yeah.
Took a day to get out of Egypt, took 40 years to get Egypt out of them. And I think we can learn every year how we can actually let it only take a couple days or a month or something.
Because it cost a generation.
It does.
There was a generation of people who didn't receive what was promised to them because they couldn't say goodbye.
Right.
And their future generations got the benefits.
Yeah.
But it was for them too. And I think in the same way, we don't want to miss out on opportunities, whether it's healthy relationships, to job promotions, to whatever, because we cannot say goodbye.
Yeah. So I want to say up front, before we kind of talk through a little bit of a how-to, if you feel that this is something in your life that is like, if you would use phrases like, I feel extremely stuck, I feel like I'm in quicksand, I feel overwhelmed,
powerless,
then I'm going to say, this might be a great opportunity to talk to a therapist about this.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about things, codependent relationships, it's not abnormal to need a professional to help you say goodbye to that.
That's so good. And to allow this to be the ignition in that direction.
Yeah. Perhaps that to your process of saying goodbye recognizes that one of the things you need to say hello to is a therapist.
Yeah.
Okay? And
job well done.
I have multiple things in my life that I would have not been able to truly say goodbye to without my therapist and my spiritual director, and then certainly my friends in my community. And so this is not an isolated process.
So good.
But please know, if we're giving you some of these tips and tricks and it sounds a little trite compared to the level of the trauma you've experienced or something, then we're not talking to you. We're saying to you, hey, there may be something deeper.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to make light at all of anyone's trauma or painful experience. But for lots of us, there's just things in a year that we just need to let go of.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily at that depth. So please just do that diagnostic on your own of what you need. And we support you wherever you're at. So we kind of thought of 3 different ways that we say goodbye, or what would you call it?
Opportunities, areas.
3 goodbye areas.
3 goodbye, but yes.
3 areas of, 3 good areas to say goodbye.
Here, mm-hmm.
So, kind of to what we were just saying, the first one is...
Well, good riddance.
Good riddance.
Good riddance. And it's deliberate that we're playing on the word good, because I think although goodbye is a painful process and can be a discipline, it's also an important and healthy one.
Yeah.
And some of our things we need to say good riddance to. Mm-hmm. They're toxic and we just need to get them out of our lives.
Yeah. So examples of those things would be toxic relationships, codependent relationships.
That friend who gossips about you and puts you down all the time perhaps doesn't need to be as closely connected to your life and relationships. Unless they change and say goodbye to their ways. Yeah. Into the future, you may want to put some distance between that.
Yeah. People pleasing.
Yes.
You've noticed that saying yes when you didn't really want to give your yes. Other patterns of thought about yourself. You might say, oh no, I'm just being funny. I do self-deprecating humor. Is it just self-deprecating humor? Or are we actually trying to have a defense mechanism to say, well, if I make these jokes, then if I do disappoint somebody, they were warned. Yeah. Like there's that.
Do you believe your self-deprecating humor?
Yeah. Do you believe it? Is it actually real? Those kinds of things. So it can be anything from very practical, tangible, to something that is very emotional, spiritual, and psychological, and really thinking through that, I think, is important. Yeah. Say good riddance to that stuff.
And maybe some habits. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have lived the late nights, and you're like, honestly, I'm not 19. Yeah. I can't do this anymore without consequences. And it's time to say good riddance to burning the candle at both ends and wondering why we're tired all the time.
Yeah. There's a number of things in that physical department I think people can think about too. Yeah, good. So good riddance. The second one is good memories. In the opposite direction, there's something really important about naming the memories that are good, even in an experience that's tough. I think back to the one major breakup I had in my life I've shared before on this podcast, but when it was finally over, what I found in my memory was actually good memories that were coming up from that relationship. And it was like I for sure had said goodbye to it. But you know what I found? I found that when I actually sat with those memories and thought about them, I could actually release them instead of kind of going, oh, don't think about my ex, don't think about my ex. It was kind of like, oh, that was really good. It's sad that didn't go where it went, but it wasn't pointless. There was something meaningful about that. That was a meaningful experience. It was meaningful for me to watch him grow in some ways in those years and vice versa. And so I was almost like taking the memory up, replaying it in my mind, and then letting it go. It was
It's
like a
interesting the
process of
journey
letting go.
of having to visit things
Mhm.
as part of the goodbye.
Yeah.
And I think there is something about with our emotions, maybe we sometimes want to high speed past them
Yeah.
and just say, and I'm done.
Yeah.
But actually find ourselves still being locked
Right.
into them. Whereas,
And you might need to do some sort of practice for that to let those go. I've heard of people like, I mean, this is not great for the earth, but like releasing a balloon or something like that for
Yeah.
those things.
maybe an imaginary
Memories.
balloon.
Imaginary balloon. Or, you know, sometimes people have taken a rock and thrown it into a river or something to physically do that.
Acknowledge
Yeah.
the journey and the accomplishment or the
Yeah.
moment.
And to say, this is now a memory. This is not my current reality. One of the most powerful stories I ever heard about this was here in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. There's a group of moms of young men who have been killed in gang violence.
Wow.
There's a group of moms, and they get together and they do some of this processing. You know, there's trauma there. There's things
Ooh.
they need to let go of. But one of the most beautiful things I've heard that they do is they bought these Japanese looms, and they take these looms where you make a tapestry,
Yeah.
and they take pieces of their son's clothing or their favorite, you know, their sheets or something that were memories of them, and they actually weave those pieces of fabric into a loom, into
Wow.
a
That's
tapestry.
incredible.
It's incredible. And so what they're doing is saying, like, these memories matter. My son mattered, but he's not here anymore, and so these things, I'm like letting them go, and then that's part of how they get rid of their son's things. They take little
Gosh.
pieces of it. It's almost like an emotional time capsule, and they put that there, and then they say, but now I need to get rid of the rest of his clothes and pass them on to somebody who needs them because they're just haunting me in the closet.
Wow.
You know? And there's something powerful about not just saying, I'm gonna just get rid of this stuff so I don't think about it, but then on the other hand, not saying, I'm gonna hold on to this as though he's still here. Like, while his spirit might be, you know, whatever, however you process that, I totally can imagine if there was a loss, but how beautiful to say, I there's parts of him that I want to keep in this kind of
Yeah.
memory, good memories of who he was and who he is to me still, even though he's not physically with us anymore.
Wow, that's profound.
Isn't that powerful?
So profound.
So obviously that's not what everyone's gonna do, but is there something you need to do like that? Are there a few items you need to keep from a relationship that ended or a person that's passed away and it's time to at least start the process? I don't know. I watched my mom do that after my dad died. It wasn't a 1 year thing. It was multiple years of figuring out how to keep what she wanted to keep of his, and for myself and my brother too, but eventually to say goodbye to his things, and that's necessary to be able to continue that process of grieving in a good way. So yeah, good memories.
What I find fascinating about that as well is the healthy engaging with our emotions as we reflect on the year.
Yeah.
You know, and I think some of those good memories are, what are the things you're celebrating?
Yeah.
What are the things
Achievements.
what are the great things you and your family or your loved ones or your key people have enjoyed together?
Uh-huh.
What things when you look at your landmarks of the year or your moments, and that could be an event and it could just be an experience, but
Right.
there's something healthy about and very I don't want to use the word life affirming in a effete way or anything, but there's something very rich
Yeah.
about acknowledging those things
Right.
and paying attention and allowing our thoughts and our process to slow down enough to acknowledge the life that we have and we've had.
I think it's important. I think one final thing that comes to mind for me is that when you had a great year, I know a lot of people who will say, oh man, I'm never going to be able to outdo 2019. It was
Yeah.
such a good year. There are some of you listening to this where some really amazing things happened. And there's a tendency for us to go, okay, 2020, I'm just going to go with low expectations because it's never going to...
Yeah, the only way is down.
Yeah, and maybe it's not the whole year, but maybe you're thinking of an achievement.
Mm-hmm.
I think of, I remember when the woman, what's her name, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Yes,
I remember hearing
Elizabeth
her.
Gilbert.
Yep, I remember hearing her interviewed once about very common reality for writers, especially creative writers, where they assume their creativity is going to be gone after
Mhm.
that book is a really big hit,
Yeah.
and they can never do it
It's
again.
like, now what?
And it's like it's like self-sabotage and a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, we can do that in little ways where we're like, oh,
So good.
well, this was such a great year because these things happened, or I got recognized for this, or I achieved something I never thought. And so if we don't say goodbye to that memory, you know, we're going to remember it. But if we don't say goodbye to that as like a thing that happened in that year, and then we're not going to have open hands to receive something new that could not necessarily be better. That's not the
That's
goal.
good.
But receive what is right for this year. But if we don't, even those good things, we don't give them like a place to rest, then I think it can really stick with us in ways that aren't helpful.
That's good. I love it.
And then we're comparing everything this year to
Oh
what
my
happened
gosh,
last
yeah,
year.
that's thief of joy.
No.
That's not going to be good for us.
So speaking of thief of joy, the last one.
Well, and I think this you touched on it in many ways
Yeah.
in terms of grief.
Yeah.
That good grief being
Right.
an important part
Right.
of our saying goodbye. That we have, some of us have had to say goodbye to people this year.
Right.
Have said goodbye to loved ones,
Right.
and we're going to be looking at a new year, and there's a gap because that person isn't part of our daily reality anymore, and that could be through bereavement, that could be through relocation, new jobs. Some of us are having to mourn the loss of a job, a much loved job in the community, and all that came with it.
Sending out your teenagers to college and
Empty nest.
they come back for Christmas break and it's not
They're
the same.
adults. They're just different.
They're adults that somehow revert to being 13. I've noticed that.
Yeah, it's like
I don't have teenagers, but I've been around a lot of teenagers.
amazing the similarities. But I think for us, as we reckon with things, people who've moved churches or things that have been really significant in their lives, that part of your acknowledging your goodbye is grief.
Right.
And as Steph already said, that's not necessarily a one-day thing or a one-year thing.
Right.
But asking ourselves what does it mean to begin to explore the goodbye?
Yeah, and I think I kind of was jumping into like giving the example of losing people, but I think a distinction that I would want to make from good memories to good grief is the story I was telling you about those moms is talking about the good memories of their son and these favorite things of his, but you also have to attend to the trauma and the sad part and the things that you need to leave behind that are actually the resistance towards actually being sad or whatever it is to say. It's like those when I've been to like a memorial service or a funeral where it's so heavy on celebrating the person's life that there's no space for grief.
Yeah.
And so then there's also we're so much focusing on grief that there's no room for celebrating the memories. And so I think it's really found in the intersection of those things.
Yeah.
And being able to say those were good memories with that person or good memories with that experience. But then for a lot of things, there is a good grief that has to happen. And I think we are keeping that word good there because there's been a lot of research done on grief. It's really good for us to press into it and actually go through it. Yeah. Not to avoid it. Really
and it's important. It's a weird thing as we're thinking of goodbyes and stuff because the impetus at the end of the year is okay, get rid of all these things and move forward and it's going to be amazing. And for certain parts of our life, that's true. But actually, when we're saying how do you say goodbye when it comes to grief, there is a being present in that moment rather than a moving away. Right. I wonder whether sometimes we mix up with our goodbyes, that we stay present in things we need to get rid of, we get rid of things we need to stay present of, and actually work out what goodbye looks like in each area of our life. And that brings up a good point, which is, it's not just what you think is going to feel the best. Ooh. Because that's the gut reaction. So when I need to do hello goodbye this year. I got some things I need to say goodbye to. And then you're like, that's where you can be tempted to say, I'm pressing away from this thing that I actually need to sit in longer. Yeah. And stay present to that. So, it's not a magic wand of these things are now not going to be a part of my life, especially if there's some processing that needs to be done. So perhaps the goodbye is the commitment to the process. Yeah, I think so. I was thinking of when my dad passed away. Now, this is a while ago now. He passed away in 2008. And he passed away in April 2008. And it was December. And I remember being in a Starbucks, because I always was, and it catching me unawares that this was the first Christmas. And it's not like he and I had a close relationship. It's not like we ever did anything around. It wasn't anything like that. Right. And I mean, grief, if only grief was linear. Do you know what I mean? Right. If only it was linear and said, you're going to feel this on these days. But I remember feeling like, I've never felt like this before or since that time, when I physically felt like I was literally falling to pieces. Well, and thinking, I'm in a store, I'm in a coffee shop, sitting here reading a book, but I actually feel like my skin is just holding the bits of me together. Wow. And I remember thinking, God, please don't let anybody talk to me. Don't let anybody talk to me because I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to fall to pieces. And I think some of that moment was me actually needing to be present with the grief. And present with, I mean, grief is unique for all of us. Right. We have different ways of telling grief. And I think because my father hadn't been massively involved in my life, and because we'd had this wonderful reconciliation as he passed, or just before he passed, it was like, okay, well, it was terrible, and we wrapped it up, but God redeemed it, and isn't it wonderful? And that became the story. But actually there was a Yeah, but you're here.
Right.
You're still here, and you have to say this goodbye,
Yeah.
rather than I moved on, and you have to be
Right.
present to this goodbye. I didn't go to his funeral. There wasn't a landmark in that sort of a way, but there was a landmark happening in my soul, whether I wanted it or not.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking about a landmark happening in my soul, whether I wanted it to or not. And that's what we mean by it's not always about what's going to feel
Yeah.
relief or the best. Ultimately, it is going to lead to the best holistic feeling,
Yeah.
but the immediate feeling is often, I just want to let this go and be rid of this, but
Yeah.
it's not real. It's not real. So,
So,
good riddance, good memories, good grief. Some thoughts. So as far as just little final tips of how-tos, if you discover you need some more time and space, try to find that time and space to process it.
yeah.
Do you need to verbally process? Do you need to journal? Do you need to do something physical like I described before? Do you need to have a reconciliation conversation to find closure with somebody?
Yeah.
Do you need to write a letter to somebody who's maybe not even alive anymore to close that chapter? Or someone you won't even send it to? Do you need to do something else to put a marker? A thing that I've done with memories is built a little mini Ebenezer. There's this hill that overlooks the city that I would go to sometimes, and I would just take some rocks up there and put them there. And it's just for me, but I'm saying God has been faithful and God did these things, and these memories are being. I mean, that's what would happen in Scripture, right? There would be this Ebenezer built to say God has been faithful to me till now, but there's more to come.
Yeah. What I love about it is there's a whole gamut of emotions in goodbye.
Yeah.
And you have permission to feel them all.
I've been thinking about this recently. Well, we all know that shame is a very powerful emotion.
Yeah.
It's very negative. It's very strips you of so many things. And some of us are like, oh yes, shame is a big factor in my life. And then there's other people who maybe it doesn't feel as much of a controlling power in your life. But here's something I've been noticing. What happens when we feel shame that we feel other emotions as though they're not, oh, that wasn't that big of a deal. I shouldn't feel so sad.
When we start putting the shoulds on.
Yeah, I
on
shouldn't
how
feel
we're
so sad.
feeling.
I shouldn't be so angry.
Yeah.
I should rationalize this. I should not be, so giddy about that thing. It wasn't that big of a deal. I don't want to be. That's actually shame too. It's not shame on you and your identity, but it's a form of that. It's sneaky. It's kind of sneaky. So if those emotions come up, like between you and God, and maybe some people are close to you, name that. Don't be afraid to name it. It's worth it.
It's good.
So those are just some thoughts. There's more we could say about it, but those are some thoughts on how to say goodbye, and that's important. We're gonna come back next week with some thoughts of how to say hello, as you're letting things go and have open hands and are ready to receive. So we'll give you some thoughts about that. But I think that's it for now.
That's it for
Anything else
now.
you wanna say?
No, that's good.
All right, everybody.
Take care.
Well, if you haven't gotten your hello goodbye yet,
Get the resource.
leadstoriesmedia.com/resources.
Wonderful.
That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.